Truth Frequency Radio Network. KTFRN. Worldwide.
Hola, this is Sienna inviting you to join me tonight as we navigate through the seen and the unseen, explore external and internal realities, expose on-world and off-world agendas, discover a path to joy and freedom. Now, join me as we illuminate the Shadowland and reclaim our birthright as free and sovereign beings. Good evening and welcome back. This is episode 33. I'm here with part 2 with Mark Passio. If you missed part 1, it is in the archives section at Truth Frequency Radio Network or on my YouTube channel at Sienna Leia, Illuminating the Shadowland. We were discussing the human propensity to perpetuate slavery, to allow massive conditions of destructivity and suffering to exist all around this planet, and in many cases seem numb, immune, and paralyzed to respond in any kind of humane way. And I would really like to continue our conversation. How can this be? How is humanity conditioned as a slave race?
Well, Sienna, it appears that we've always been in this condition, that humanity has never actually been a free species. And this involves having to go back to a deep, penetrating look at human origins. And many people think that, we know a whole lot about human origins, and isn't it proven that Darwinian theory, isn't that how it really happened? Didn't we evolve from, hominid species and, our ape-like ancestors? Isn't that how it occurred? Well, it's not as clear-cut as many people believe that it is, because of how modern scientism perpetuates that is just the gospel truth of what actually occurred in our past. And a lot of people are loath to begin to look at this issue because, again, they just believe the religion of scientism. Mm-hmm. And what we really need to do is understand that this government-funded religion that we laughingly call science is trying to hold a paradigm in place. They're trying to hold a story about reality in place that is disempowering. Now, when you hear what I'm going to lay out, people will say, my God, how could anything be more disempowering than the knowledge that we may be a slave species from the very beginning, that we were made this way with these characteristics? And I say no, not true. It's exactly the other way around. Being lied to about our origins and having our true origins covered up and concealed and withheld from us is disempowering. Knowing where we really came from is very empowering, because then it helps to explain why things are the way they are. The causal factors are then explained and things become less mysterious. And we start saying, whoa, I know why this is this way now. Now I can start actually taking action to do something about it because I know what caused it. And we may start looking into certain technologies that can help us, assist us along the way in helping to understand what's been done to us and how we may be able to undo it. Because it has a lot to do with genetics. It has a lot to do with genetic degradation and manipulation of the human genome. Yeah. Now, you look at that model that I came up with before on the last show. I call it the tree of evil, the tree of all things that are evil. And that go on and that continue to go on that are evil, and how we allow that to continue. Willful ignorance is the fruit. That it's really the very top of the tree that bears the fruit of slavery, if you want to be specific about it. Then beneath that, at the twigs and branches level, we have the fear of truly stepping into our own personal responsibility. And then beneath that, like the trunk of the tree, you could look at it in this model, is self-loathing. Lack of true self-respect and self-love. And then, again, we gave the causal factor, parental abandonment issues, which you could look at on this model that I look at as a tree. They're the roots. The roots of the tree are parental abandonment issues, whether they are physical abandonment issues or spiritual, mental, psychological, emotional, etc. So, that's at an individual scale level. Now, when we look at wide scale, universal, global parental abandonment issues, or what I call cosmic abandonment issues, if we look at the origins of humanity, we will see that we as a species are like an abandoned child. Not only are most individual people on the earth manifesting the consciousness of a child with abandonment issues in their own personal lives, but again, the whole species taken as a whole in the aggregate is like a child that was left alone by the parent, or like made and discarded. So this illustrates the principle, the correspondence principle. That which is below is like to that which is above, and that which is above is like to that which is below. You know, we are self-similar across all scales, as is going on in the consciousness of the individual members of any given society. So that's reflected in the aggregate as the species, in the species. So let's look at some of the things that we are told by many ancient accounts that did happen in our past. And there's so many source materials to look into. None of them have the whole story. Again, this is why so many people have no idea about any of this, because one, they've never even researched any of these materials, and two, they certainly haven't looked at them in a connected way. That they're all really telling different aspects of the same story of the ancient past based upon the cultural interpretations of the people living in any given area of the world at specific times in the ancient past. So we have fragmentary accounts, admittedly. I'm not going to tell you that this is a 100% nice, neat little package wrapped up with a ribbon and bow, because it's not. Okay? It involves years of study to even begin to break this down from the original source material and look at it in context. It's like, again, having many different pieces of a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, but you might have a little over half of them, and you have to put it together on a table to make sense of what the total picture might look like. And you might have enough pieces to do that. And I feel we do have enough pieces to do that. So we can look at some source texts like the Sumerian epics of creation, the cuneiform tablets, the clay tablets that were left by the Sumerians. We could, of course, look at biblical texts like the book of Genesis, and then what might be considered by certain religious denominations and personages as apocryphal texts, like the book of Enoch, but that's from essentially biblical time periods. We could look at Indus Valley tradition texts like the Mahabharata or the Ramayana or the Srimad Bhagavatam, etc. We could look at, there's other biblical texts like the book of Ezekiel. We have other Sumerian and Babylonian accounts like the Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, the Vedas of the Indus Valley tradition. You have tribal histories like the stories and myths of the Dogon tribes, the Zulu tribe histories. We can go on and on and on. Mayan texts like the Popol Vuh, Norse texts and epic poems like the Eddas. This story's been told so many different ways by so many different cultures, in fragmentary ways, again, and with cultural interpretations. And you have to understand, we're talking about ancient peoples who are simply trying to tell what they observed and saw as magic. Any technology that is advanced enough is indistinguishable from magic and sorcery. So these people witnessed things they couldn't explain, so they tried in their own cultures to put it down in writing so that they could explain what they were seeing. So we have to interpret it and understand what they were seeing was something so advanced they had no language for it, and they were doing their best to try to explain what they were seeing. So essentially, in a nutshell, I could give an outline of this story, and many people will outright reject it. Maybe not your listening crowd, because they're more advanced on this path of looking into matters of truth. But the average person may not even be psychologically ready or prepared to hear the horror story of what happened in our past. But I'll try to briefly outline it.
Thank you.
Beings that were not human arrived on this planet probably millions of years ago. Not thousands, not hundreds, tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands. Most likely millions of years they've been here with us. And again, the nature, people will... we want certainty. People, the ego wants certainty, the mind wants certainty, the psyche likes certainty.
Yeah.
Human beings are more comfortable with certainty. I'm not going to tell you I'm certain of these beings' nature, because I'm not. I'm speculating, okay? And I don't think the nature of these beings matters as much. People want to fight about that. And they want to fight about it for religious reasons, okay? Let's be clear on that. Whether these beings are extraterrestrial in a classical sense, meaning they're from another three-dimensional world like ours, like Earth somewhere else, okay? Whether they are extra-dimensional or interdimensional from another frequency of existence, a plane, what many cosmic physicists, theoretical physicists might call a brain of existence, okay? Whether they may be angelic in their nature, demonic in their nature, or something we can't even conceive of. Who knows? They may be interterrestrial. They may be from the earth, from under the seas, from in places we can't go. I don't know. I'm admittedly stating I don't know their nature. There's something that is not us. Who knows what their real nature is? Does that matter as much as what they have done, what they may be continuing to do, and what we are continuing to do because we're acting the same as them, as they acted many millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years ago? And people want to get bogged down in these details, okay? Yeah. I am not going to get bogged down in details like what is their nature and how long have they been here. When it comes to freeing ourselves from slavery, that doesn't matter as much as understanding how they operated, what they did, and how we can undo it. I mean, just logically think about what I've stated there, okay? Whether this being would be a typical alien as human beings conceptualize them as having a physical body, or whether they were some sort of spiritual entity, would that matter as much as what they're doing, how they're interacting with us, and how we're responding to that interaction by capitulating to their demands? If we use the magic word, the all-powerful lost word, no, it's game over. I don't care what their nature is. When we step into our power as a species and say no, game over. Slavery is over once enough people start using that word. So, again, let's just call them non-human beings, non-human entities. Whatever their nature may be, they weren't human as we are, okay? So they've been described in all these different cultural histories and ancient texts looked at as sacred text, etc. They've been described in different ways. They've been described as gods, okay? And some people take them as the literal God of creation. I see them as something way altogether different than anything having to do with the God of creation. They're the exact polar antithesis of that, if anything, as far as I understand, in the way I see them, okay? They have been described as gods with small g's, like, beings that are so advanced and powerful that they look like gods. All right, they've been described as, again, spirits or supernatural entities, because many people can't conceive that they could actually even be beings, physical beings like us, and maybe they're not. They've been described as giants because in stature, allegedly, they were much larger than us, at least the original beings that came here many hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago. People called them giants. Again, many of them were up to 2 to 3 times the size of a human being, maybe bigger. Some people refer to them as watchers, specifically books like the Book of Enoch talk about them as watchers. They are. I've heard them referred to as custodians or guardians. I hate that word personally in relation to these beings, in regard to these beings, because that implies some sort of trust or legitimacy, stewardship, custodial nature, guardianship. That is like how we might treat our children or animals that we live with, and I absolutely do not see them as such. I think that's a terrible word to liken these beings to. I'd rather call them just the slave masters, okay, or the people running the plantation. All right, that's probably my best term for these beings. If I were pressed, I call them the archons, as many other researchers have called them, because the archon is a Greek word that means master or ruler, and there should be no legitimacy applied to that. You know, the only form of legitimacy to mastery is self-mastery. It's the only kind of mastery that is legitimate. When you are the master of yourself and you have conquered your own harmful aspects, your animalistic aspects of your being, and you've mastered the self. That's true mastery. That's non-illusory mastery. Any form of mastery where you consider yourself the master over other people or the ruler over other people, that's illusion. And it's mental illness. So when I talk about archons, I'm talking about them in the sense that they look at themselves as master over other people. It doesn't apply to self-mastery, that term. Okay? So that's what I call them, the archons. But they've been called many other things. Okay? In the Sumerian texts, their epics of creation and clay tablets, they were called those who came from the heavens to the earth, if we translate the word. And again, many people will have heard this word from researchers like Zechariah Sitchin and Eric von Daniken and others, Anunnaki. And that's just the word literally means those who came from the sky or from the heavens down to the earth. Okay, people have called these beings biblically in the biblical text. Some of them were referred to as Nephilim. Now, they're a subspecies. They're another hybrid, which I'll get into. But they're not what I would consider the first wave of these beings, or what you might call the pure blood variant of these beings. They're a hybridization. So I'll get into that briefly. But they came here for resources of some type, or something in their own interest, of the way they live their life. And again, here's another thing people squabble over, that it could be somewhat important. I'm not going to say this may be completely irrelevant, because we could get into some of the nature of what they may have come here for. But again, I think that's less important than what they did to us as a result of their, quote, mission, or the reason, the selfish reason that they were here on this planet, or came here.
Yeah.
Beings who haven't arrived at a very, very, very high level of consciousness continue to live off of other beings. We do it through animals, okay? Ultimately, when you get to a higher level of consciousness, you don't need to live off of any other beings, okay? You don't have to suck energy like a vampire from other creatures, okay? So we can live off of plant material, okay? Then at some point, if we evolve further by taking in that higher nutrient plant material, we can then eventually live on just water. Then maybe we can live on just sunlight. I know that there's people who can live on sunlight. A friend of mine is a sun gazer. And I'm telling you, literally, he might eat one apple in a couple of weeks. That's how much food he takes in, and he's in perfect health. So nobody can tell me that it isn't possible. I know that it is. Not everybody is at that level of the ability to do that with their body, because they're not at that level of self-mastery. I wouldn't even claim to be at that level. But I'm telling you, unimaginable things can be done when we understand the nature of energy. And, you know, I do believe we can actually sustain ourselves from the sun. Well, why wouldn't we be able to? What form of life is possible without our star, without the sun? The sun is something we can barely even imagine what it really is. We think of it as just a star having some kind of a nuclear reaction in it, when it's an electrical sun, as a matter of fact. And first of all, it's not just a star. The sun is something much more miraculous and is probably a huge, higher dimensional spiritual being in and of itself, if we really want to get deep about, what allows light to sustain life. Because that's the essence of life. That's the life force energy in its pure form. So of course we can take that in and sustain life. That's where life comes from. Life wouldn't be possible without the sun. At least not here, not in this 3D realm that we call the solar system. Getting a little sidetracked, but really what I'm talking about is energy. That's why I went off on that tangent. And these beings came here for energy of some form because they're still living off of lower 3D forms. And, if you really understand that, they came here to acquire something in the physical realm, and they made us to help them in that task. So I'll get into this a little bit. So their primary mission was to come here for physical resources. Now, different accounts say that they came here for different things. The most commonly or universally accepted resource that they came here for was gold, another substance that we do not know the real nature of. Okay? Why is it eternal? Why does it not break down? Why does it not tarnish? Why can we, essentially break it down into monoatomic atoms of it that have strange properties that make things lighter? If you look into the physical properties of monoatomic gold, it actually reduces mass somehow to have less weight on an object. Maybe these beings travel the universe that way. Maybe these beings enhance their mind with it in some form. I don't know. Again, there's many different aspects to the puzzle that I can't claim to know, nor would I say anybody can actually claim definitively to know. We can speculate. Speculation is going to be a big part of this whole story. Okay, I'm not saying this is absolute fact. I'm saying we need to look into it more. We need not thousands, we need millions of people looking into this, making this one of the big areas of their research, so we can put these pieces of the puzzle together in a way that makes sense. So, go ahead.
No, but there are a lot of people that are concurring that this is true, that there was some sort of a cataclysm and we were DNA spliced with these races. Tessarian says 3 different times, and there were the masters and there were the slaves. Right. And the trauma from this is what I would love to explore. We have about 5 minutes to break, but I would love to break this down because it's a core wound that if we possess, and I believe we do, we have to address it. Sure. We have to find a way to heal it, or else we continue to be authority addicts and don't seem to get beyond this primal trauma.
Right. So when these beings came here, they didn't have a large enough worker force to get done what they needed to get done, as these ancient stories talk about. What they decided to do was to take an existing species that was naturally evolving on this planet, which were our hominid, quote, ancestors. They would have eventually evolved to something that was akin to a human being or like it, but I would say probably with even greater capabilities because they weren't tampered with. So these beings that were essentially bipedal, hominid-type creatures, naturally living in homeostasis and equilibrium with their environment on the Earth, naturally adapted to living on the surface of this planet, which we are not. We're the only species, aside from species we've genetically created, like the domesticated dog and cat, that aren't naturally adapted to living in the wilderness on the surface of this planet. Think about that for a moment and why that could be. So these beings decided, very confrontatively amongst each other, I might add, with a lot of disagreement, that they were going to take that existing species and hybridize it to make it more advanced and bring it out of its naturally developing evolutionary state, make it much more advanced, but just advanced enough that it could do laborious, repetitive, dangerous work without rebelling against its captivity. That it would be intelligent enough to receive instructions for work, do that work rather mindlessly, and never say, why are we being made to do this labor and you're taking all of the fruits of that labor? They wouldn't rebel against that. And it sounds real similar to humanity today, doesn't it?
Yes.
Very similar, because nothing has really changed since this time in the ancient human past. But we can change it if we understand enough and then apply our willpower to make that change occur. Right. So the mission leaders were the most vehemently disagreeing beings regarding that this was something that should have been done to this other species. So I'll use the Sumerian names for them, although many different cultures have different names for these beings. The two mission leaders in the Sumerian epic version of this story of human origins was, the main leader was Enlil. He was the one fully in charge. And then the second in command was Enki, his half-brother. And Enlil wanted no... Enki, the second in command, is who came up with the plan to hybridize another species and give them capabilities that they didn't ordinarily possess so that they could do this work and they would be able to get out of there faster, because Earth was a place that wasn't very hospitable to them. Their atmosphere was probably very different than ours. The living conditions was different. The sun was different. All of it. And it was... Okay,
Mark, we have to go to a short break.
Sure.
We'll pick it right up here with the Anunnaki and discover further what this trauma-based mind control, how far back, how deep it goes, so we can find the way to heal. Thank you so much, Mark. Stay with us. This is Illuminating the Shadowland on Truth Frequency Radio Network. Welcome back, everyone. This is Sienna Leia, and I'm here with Mark Passio. We are talking about cosmic abandonment. Mark, let's just pick it right up where we left off with the two brothers, if we may, please.
Sure. Well, the plan was devised by this being known as Enki. At least that was his name in the Sumerian epic stories. And that means the god of the earth. And because he was kind of appointed to be the liaison between their civilization and this planet. So Enlil's name means god of the air, because it appears he was he didn't administrate the day-to-day activities on the ground. He stayed in a station of some sort that was in the heavens, whether a craft or a moon base or something to that effect.
Okay.
So Enki devised this plan to genetically modify the existing hominid creatures by giving them an infusion of these beings, this extraterrestrial species DNA. So it would be a mixture between native Earth hominid beings and Anunnaki genes. And they would get a mixture right such that these beings would be essentially like an automaton race that could just take commands, perform the work, and that would make it much easier and faster for these beings to perform their mission and get out of here. Because again, the conditions here were not conducive to their well-being, and they didn't like being here. And the amount of workers that they brought with them were on the verge of mutiny. They didn't want to be worked this hard and long. Because we're not talking about just years, we're talking about hundreds or thousands of years that they were doing what they were doing here to procure, again, whatever the resources that they came here to procure. Again, many of these accounts talk about it as gold or a gold-like substance, but more likely than not actual physical gold. Enlil, the Enki's half-brother, hated the plan from the very first time it was proposed, because he didn't want to create a slave species. He inherently knew that that was against all the laws of creation, and that ultimately it would bring really, really horrific karma down upon them. Now, Enlil gets the bad name. He gets the bad rap, and people look at him as, the real bad guy because of how he treated human beings after this act was done. However, I don't see it that way, and I see both of them as pretty bad in different ways, but I don't really see either one of them as the good guy and the other guy as the bad guy. So many researchers make this distinction, and I'll give my impression of why I don't look at it like that. Because Enlil had a conscience from the beginning, but wouldn't follow it, or at least allowed himself to take up his place in the hierarchy that already existed in his race. Okay? So he warned his half-brother that this is going to be an abomination. What you're doing is playing God. We have no right to do this. And only the power to create a new species only belongs with the creator of the universe. That was Enlil's belief system. Okay? And he made that very vocally clear in these accounts from the first time it was proposed. So, they put this to vote in their council of elders, you could say, on their home world. And it was decided that the plan to create the genetically modified race would go ahead. They were given approval. The away mission was given approval to do that. So Enlil got voted down. And he went along with it because, hey, I'm the mission commander. I was given orders from headquarters, and I just follow orders. So he knew it was wrong and still helped them go ahead with it anyway. Which is, again, makes him not really a being of conscience. He had conscience. He didn't exercise it. See, that's the difference between knowing the difference between right and wrong, but yet not acting within it. So he didn't exercise conscience.
Okay.
So his brother was appointed as the person who would oversee the genetic mission, this modification, so that they could procure the worker bees that they needed and get the mission finished and get out of there. So as you know, with anything that's going to start off in an immoral capacity, it's going to snowball. And things are going to get worse and worse. Unforeseen situations are going to come up. And then you're going to be having to do things to try to mitigate or deal with those unforeseen circumstances. Blowback, in other words. And this happened continuously throughout their mission because they started doing this extremely immoral thing by messing with the natural evolutionary development of an entire race. So they did the modification, and first of all, it didn't go smoothly. These weren't like the most advanced genetic researchers in the galaxy or the universe. They probably were at a level of genetic understanding that's only somewhat more advanced than our own now at this time in history. Probably fairly significantly, but not like, where they were doing things that were absolutely perfect and atomic level precision. They were still cutting at, splicing at a chemical level of scale, which creates bit errors in gene sequences. And unforeseen things come up when you do genetic splicing like that, like we do it today. You have to let it express, and then sometimes it expresses as something that you intended, and sometimes horrific things express, like, monstrous conditions and genetic, deformations that you had no idea would express because you're not doing it at 100% computer level, binary, digital, atomic scale precision. So, again, their precision level was not what we would think of as, godlike by any stretch of the imagination. And this created certain things in our genome that we see today. The 4,000 genetic anomalous disorders that don't exist in other species but exist in the human genome. Also, when they got the first mark or race of these hybrid beings, they noticed that they were very rebellious. They were too rebellious for their liking. And they started wanting to be free and live their own lives and not do these beings' work for them. So they had to then dumb them down more and genetically modify them even more. Again, as other researchers like Michael Tessarion and others have talked about by delving into a lot of these accounts, many genetic modifications may have been done to take more of our innate capabilities away. Now, whether you think that that's taking away the hominid DNA, or it was dumbing down or taking away some of the Anunnaki's DNA, it's irrelevant. The whole point is the being that we were made, first of all, shouldn't have existed. And I understand how dark of a worldview that sounds. Humanity never should have existed in the first place. I get how dark that sounds. However, we do exist. This was done. It is the truth. It is that which occurred. Regardless of what made that happen, we exist. Therefore, I'm not saying we should just willfully commit mass suicide as a species, although I think we're well along the way to that path by our own doing. I don't think that that's a smart idea. I don't think that that's what should be done. I think we should try to uplift our species out of this condition by an act of our own will through knowledge. And can that be done? Yes, it can. Will it be done? That's a whole different story. That depends on how much we will it for ourselves by starting to love ourselves and believe that we're worth more than this condition of slavery. Yeah. Are enough people in that condition? No, not right now. Can that happen? Yes, it can. It's going to take a lot of work, and we're nowhere near that yet. But going back to this story, they modified us several times, too. And these depictions are all there in the ancient accounts. They always depict the genetic code as a tree. Tree with these two sides of branches. And that's the DNA base pairs of the ladder called the DNA helix. They just depicted it. The ancient Sumerians didn't, definitively know the exact structure of the DNA molecule, so they depicted it as a tree. And you see these godlike beings that were depicted as the Anunnaki were depicted as, they're always working with this tree material. It isn't symbolic. It is symbolic, but it's not just an allegorical thing that is about like something that is spiritual. It's a physical thing. The tree represented actual DNA material that they were working with in their laboratories. And the ancients were trying to depict this in whatever symbolic way they were capable of depicting it, and they always chose a tree to represent genetics. So you'll see that a lot if you study the cylinder seals, the tablets, the friezes or stelae that were left by these ancient, our ancient ancestors. So what happened was, after they started putting these beings to work in their minds, they were well along the way toward their work being done more efficiently. And at some point, many tens of thousands of years later, they had to come up with something that they were going to do, because most of their people were going to leave and go back to their home world. I'm talking about the purebred beings. Now, unfortunately, what happened during their whole stay, is some of their people, against their planet and the mission that they were on, the rules, which they have already done something that was technically against the rules of nature by creating us. But then, since they were on an extended away mission, and many of these beings became lonely and even further imbalanced by their long stay away from their home world, they started interbreeding with their own creation, with their own genetic hybridized species. So these beings were sexually compatible. They had enough DNA that was, the hybrid species, I should say, had enough DNA that was compatible that they could sexually reproduce with the beings that they created. And in the biblical accounts, this is told that they found the men of their species found the women of our species fair, in other words, sexually attractive, and they, took wives of them, however many of them they wanted. And so they started spreading their genetics into the human genetic pool, the hybridized species genetic pool, to create yet another hybrid species through birth, not through a genetic laboratory experiment like they did the first hybrid species between themselves and this hominid species that was naturally evolving on Earth.
Right.
They created a third species, or you could say this was a fourth, because you have them, you have the hominid species that was natural to the earth, inherent to the earth, indigenous to the earth is probably the best way to say it, and then you have humans. Now you have a alien-human mixture, okay, or a Anunnaki-human mixture. And this is what the biblical accounts refer to as the Nephilim. And there's a reason that they call them Nephilim, which in Hebrew means those who have fallen. Okay? People look at these as fallen angels because these beings were looked at as angels or gods by the human beings that had no idea what they were. They said, we're your makers. We're your gods. You know? That's a lot easier to get them to stay under control than telling them, hey, we came from another world or another dimension and we made you as our slaves. You know, they wouldn't want to listen to their commands then, but they said, we're your gods. We created everything, including you. Well, then, hey, they're our gods, you know. We have to listen to what they tell us to do. You see the psychological condition they placed us in?
Wow.
And, you know, so whether they actually were fallen angels or demonic entities, maybe they were. Hey, I'm not opposed to that idea. What I'm saying is I'm not going to get caught up in a fight over that or a debate over that, because ultimately the solution is the same. We reject slavery. Whether we're enslaved by demonic entities or physical 3D beings from another physical planet, it doesn't matter. The word no applies equally to slavery, regardless of what type of being put us in it.
Yeah.
Okay? So, I hope people can understand what I mean by that. It's not like I wouldn't like to know the actual nature of their existence. I'm just saying, it's like getting wrapped up in how the World Trade Center towers were destroyed, except understanding why it was done, who did it, and what the reason that they did it for. Okay? And then exposing it as a fraud, the official story is a fraud, and getting people to take action. Okay? To
Yes.
expose that. Same thing here. You get bogged down in the minutia, okay, which does not matter as much as ending the condition they put us under, and all you're going to do is infight. And you're not going to make any grounds to the end goal, which is ending slavery on Earth. Okay, so going back to the story, they started interbreeding with their own creation, making yet a fourth species, which was called the Nephilim, or the fallen ones, those who have fallen. And what that means is they were not allowed to go back because they couldn't bring this hybrid species with them where they came from. So they had to leave them on the earth. They didn't take them up into their craft and let them stay there. This other hybrid species, which you could call the demigods, for lack of a better term. Again, I don't even like the term gods, okay? Human-alien hybrid race, fine, but that's a mouthful. Demigods is an easy way of differentiating them from the original quote-unquote gods, or original purebred Anunnaki species, those who came from the heavens to the earth, okay, that originally came here. So I'll just stick with the terms gods, small g, and demigods, small g, okay, for simplicity's sake. This demigod species was not allowed to go back with the gods. So they were made to stay on the ground, on the earth. Hence, they were fallen ones. They could not reascend with the gods because they weren't going to take them back to their home world, where they had performed yet another abomination that could be looked at as even worse, because you now interbred your DNA with a species that never should have existed, that we made as a tool for our work. Now you went and put your own genetic material into the bloodline with these other beings and made yet another species that should not have existed, the Nephilim, the fallen ones.
So those were the masters, the slave masters, when they left?
Yes. Now, what they did is they used this hybridized race, which looked similar to them, but yet it didn't look exactly like them, and they were obviously much smaller because human women were capable of bearing these beings. Okay, so they were bigger than normal humans, but they were smaller certainly than the original quote giants or gods, quote unquote, that came here. And what they did is they used this situation to their benefit to further control the human beings. They told them these are the demigods now. They have more of the gods in them. They are the direct intermediaries between the gods and humans. So they put them down as administrators on the earth of their will, so they didn't have to directly interact as much with the slave species. And these demigods became the priest class. They became the ruling class. They became the intermediaries between the humans and the gods, and their makers, because they looked more like the gods than the normal humans did, and they had more of their DNA, and they had more of their mental capabilities.
Is this the origin of the bloodlines that are controlling humanity today?
Of course it is. It's not only the origins of all of the genetic aspects and personality traits of the psychopathic ruling class, and again, that is also because of the degradation that was done through genetic modification of the human genome, which also exists in them, possibly exacerbated by a further infusion of this Anunnaki DNA to create this hybrid, the demigod race or the Nephilim race. And, that could have exacerbated psychopathy in this fourth species, the demigods.
Absolutely.
So psychopathy is something that was created by their imprecise genetic modification. And over many tens of thousands of years, these beings interbred, and obviously since they are the, you could say they're the dominant gene as far as characteristics go, but eventually their gene pool watered down more and more and more until the physical traits and characteristics dissolved into humanity. And now we cannot really tell the difference between their bloodline and a normal human. They look like us, but they're not really the same as us. There are beings who have personality and genetic characteristics that aren't like a normal human being living on the earth. And again, a psychopath, in my work, I try to explain to people desperately, and they don't want to hear it. Some people do, but too few want to understand. A psychopath is not a human being. A psychopath is not a human being, ladies and gentlemen. I don't care how much you want to say I'm exaggerating or I'm dehumanizing. A psychopath looks like a human being and has characteristics that are non-human. A human being has the capacity to feel. It has a normal emotional response range. If a being does not have that capacity to feel, for all intents and purposes, it is something different than a human being. It is an animal that walks on two legs, that talks like a human being, looks like a human being, walks like a human being, and unfortunately, it is not actually a human being. And that's what a psychopath, and I'm talking about a type 1, a genetic psychopath, okay? Primary psychopath, as they are known as. Not a secondary psychopath. Secondary psychopathy is you're living in such degraded conditions that you eventually stop caring and you mimic the qualities of a psychopathic brain, which from birth does not have the ability to feel emotion, because the limbic brain is fundamentally different and has a different neuroelectrical way of interacting than does a normally functioning human midbrain or limbic system, which can generate the neuropeptides that are make us feel in the physiology, in the physical sense. So psychopaths don't have that ability in the midbrain at all. And nothing's going to turn it on. You cannot reform a primary psychopath. And I'm telling you, this is one of the most things I get the most resistance to in all of my work, is people acknowledging that there are things out there that look like a human being and absolutely have no capacity to feel, nor can ever develop the capacity to feel. It is their nature.
And they're controlling our world.
Right. Yes. I'll just give a brief anecdote here, because it's very interesting.
We have 5 minutes left.
Sure.
So just so you know.
Hopefully this will be enough to wrap up this segment. Okay. I recently watched a television show that I normally would never have come across. Someone that I knew was watching a show about just just human relationships, and I think it was like one of these housewives shows or something, like I might be mistaken about what it was. I don't even remember. I just remember what it was about. These two women were fighting because one woman's boyfriend of many years had cheated on her and had sex with one of her very close friends. Okay, so this woman was very, 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 very upset, and the boyfriend showed absolutely no remorse, no emotional response whatsoever, could not acknowledge he had done anything wrongful or harmful that harmed her emotional well-being, etc. And he had done this repeatedly with whoever he wanted, whenever he wanted. It was just a pattern for him. His friend, his good friend who was a man, who had been his friend most of his life, said, "This is how you've acted all your life. I've never known you to be any different way. You never show any remorse. You never show any emotion. You do whatever you want. You don't care who gets hurt. You step on anybody. And you've been like this since I've known you as a child. And you've never said, I'm sorry. You never, because he doesn't feel sorry. He's honest. He's being honest. And this other guy who did this cheating and, hurt his girlfriend, and they, I guess, eventually broke up, he had been seeing a psychologist for many years trying to find out what was wrong with him. And all of these people on this show are looking at him, attacking him, talking to him, saying, why do you behave like this? Why do you behave like this? But the word psychopath or sociopath never came up. None of them thought or understood that this might be primary psychopathy, that he was born this way. He was born as a genetic psychopath, and he has never felt anything, ever. And what he's doing by trying to sleep with, hundreds of different women is he's trying to feel something. He's trying himself through physical sensation overload to make himself feel something, some kind of an emotional connection. That's why he became a sex addict. Very, very interesting. But also, I'm sitting there almost, not in a nasty or degrading way, like laughing, like I'm laughing because all you people are in pain and you don't know what's going on. I'm chuckling at the lack of knowledge, because just tiny bit of knowledge about this condition, and it's like in an instant, in a heartbeat, I could see what it was.
Okay, Mark,
wrestling with it.
We're going to have to pick this up at some other time. Website. Mark, you have a massive amount of information. I know people are going to want to dive into it more. Where do they go?
WhatOnEarthIsHappening.com is my main website. Once again, that's WhatOnEarthIsHappening.com. There's a tremendous body of information up there, tons of videos. The main body of info comes in the form of my podcasts. I highly recommend people to listen to them in order on the podcast page. Go back to number 1, work your way forward from number 1 forward in order without skipping around at your own pace, and you'll get the most value out of that audio series by doing it that way. Also, if you're more interested in this particular material, you'll want to listen to my live radio show every Saturday night, 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. Eastern Time on Republic Broadcasting Network. That's where I do my live radio show on Saturday. And you can check out my video, Cosmic Abandonment, available both on my website, WhatOnEarthIsHappening.com, in the video section, as well as on my YouTube channel. Sienna, I want to thank you so much for inviting me onto the show today. Let's do it again sometime.
Yes, magnificent. Thank you so much, Mark.
Take good care.